It's been over 6 months since my last video, and I hope you all have been doing well. I took a bit of a break during the summer to recharge, but now I'm back and thrilled to share the progress of my portfolio. I've been working hard on several aspects, including refining the camera model, improving the navigation transitions, and introducing a new feature I am particularly excited about: the image carousel. During this time, I focused not only on improving the aesthetics, but also on improving the user experience. The camera model has undergone significant improvements, resulting in the better and visually appealing presence of the portfolio. The highlight of this update is the implementation of the image carousel, allowing for a dynamic showcase of my photography work, which ties the whole website together. I can now present you my first working prototype of my portfolio. In my previous video, I featured a website that served as a major source of inspiration for the current version of my portfolio. The aesthetics and functionality of its carousel caught my eye, so I started researching how I could create a similar effect. To keep myself organized, and because I needed to find a starting point, I tried to split everything up into smaller tasks, which I could work through one by one. First of all, I just tried to load an image texture onto a plain geometry and adding a border radius. Then I needed to figure out how I could position everything dynamically, which quickly led me to realize I also need to rotate the images correctly, how to make everything scrollable, and finally how to achieve the bending effect. To load image textures in React 3 Fiber, I used the handy useLoader hook, which I needed to pass a texture loader from Three.js and the image URL. And while I'm writing and researching all of this for the script, I just learned that there also exists a useTexture hook in React 3 Dry, which makes everything just a little bit easier. You can just pass your image URLs directly into it and don't need to add the texture loader separately. And there even exists a third way to achieve this, as React 3 Dry also implements an image component which basically handles all of this, and you can just pass it the URL. This example also shows one way to add a border radius to the image component. It makes use of the extend function to add third-party components to the list of available JSX elements, and in this case, we are using the rounded plane geometry from the math package, which handles everything for us. Now I have just one plane floating in the middle of nowhere. Before I can even begin thinking about calculating any positions dynamically, I need a way to add more images to the scene. For simplicity's sake, I just reused all the image URLs from when I built the 3D gallery. Where do I begin now? First of all, I wrote a component which I creatively called orbit images. This accepts two parameters, radius and images. The radius should be pretty self-explanatory. The images parameter, however, should be an array of URLs pointing to images, which obviously would later be used by the useLoader hook. With this setup, I could iterate over the images array to render a new plane for each image. And for now, I just offset the position by a few pixels to display them next to each other in a line. Okay, now I was already hitting a small resistance because of my rusty math skills. I knew I needed to calculate positions for the x and z axes, as I didn't want to move the images up and down on the y axis. But how the f do I calculate this now? Well, lucky me, I got a trick up my sleeve. Who would have guessed it? AI. Well, this whole process just consisted of me aggressively typing what I wanted to achieve and the AI doing something completely different. After a lot of back and forth, I finally came up with something useful. And as we can see, it worked. But we can also see the images are not really forming a circle. They are placed in one, but they're not facing the correct direction. So AI, could you help me again, please? This was actually much easier than I thought. If I actually used my last two brain cells for 5 minutes, I would have probably found this out by myself, but hey, I'm still a lazy developer. Well, there's almost no difference to the previous formula. Only that this time we don't want to move the images on either the x or z axes and instead rotate them only on the y axis. This makes a lot of sense if we visualize this. Both the other axes would affect images in a way we don't want it to spin. And as I already said, the formula is almost the same as for the position. Only difference is that we don't use math sin or math cos here. We put all of this together, we have our planes perfectly aligned and positioned in a circle. Lucky for me, scrolling is relatively easy to achieve with the help of 3dry. The library comes with a scroll controller component and a useScroll hook, which will handle all of the heavy lifting for me. To get started, I wrapped the scroll controller around all of my images. You should also always pass the amount of pages that should be scrolled, and here I decided to pass it the length of the image array. I have no idea if this is a good idea, but for now it works. Instead of my own image component, I added the useScroll hook, which returns me all kind of information about the scrolling distance, offset, and much more. To achieve my desired scrolling effect, I just updated the rotation in the useFrame hook. Now the hardest part out of everything. How to bend the planes. This really just took a toll on me and I got stuck there for weeks. In the end, it was just one line of code which messed me up, which makes it even more frustrating, honestly. Okay, quick rewind. Everything from the start. In this step, I decided it would be a good idea to take a peek into the source code of my initial inspiration. I already knew that this effect probably was implemented by a custom shader, so I had a basic idea what I was looking for. The problem was, I barely could identify it or even read half of the code because it was obscured, and almost all classes had non-descriptive names like BD, where could I just guess what it was meant to be. I'm starting to feel like an investigator now because I had to dig way deeper here to find out what I was looking for. I needed some kind of reference point, a clue you could say. Okay, the most obvious thing on the landing page was that the image carousel was wrapped in a ribbon, which spelled the word work for a few times. So I tried to search for this in the source code. And yes, I found something. There were quite a few functions and code snippets which were referencing work, to a point where I found a function called add work items. This sounded promising, as I was guessing that a work item would probably be one image displayed. And I think I was on the right track. Indeed, reading a few lines of code revealed a shader, formatted and minified in one single line of code, so it was unreadable. But I just created a new file in my project, copied everything there, and tried to format everything so I could start to read through it. Well, in terms of shader programming, I just understand the mere basics, and you can hunt me with all of the calculations that were happening here. But my naive approach was to try to implement all of this in my code to see if it would have some effect. I was fully expecting everything to work after finishing up the implementations and fixing a few small issues here and there. It didn't. At all. It was like I didn't even change a single line of code, just nothing changed. What the hell? What was going on? I had no idea. I really tried to dig deeper and understand what was happening. Not even Copilot or ChatGPT could help me. So I soon ran out of energy because I had no idea where I should even start approaching this problem. I let it rest for a few days and came back to it with a fresh mind. Well, as I already told you, I was just blind. There was a single if clause that prevented everything from coming together. After I removed the if, everything was working like I expected. Now I basically just have a replica of the original version, but that's not what I want. I still want to change it and put my own ideas into it. At the moment, it always covers the whole page as well as the camera model, which would be pretty useless in that case. From the beginning, I always wanted the user to interact with the camera, so I went back to the roots and implemented a version where the images will only be displayed when the user clicks on the camera. To write this, I added an on-hover effect on the camera, which would increase the scale of the model, so it would be more clear for the user that they can interact with it. The images are then only displayed when the model is clicked. But now I run into a new issue, because this orbit images component would need to know when the user clicked the camera, and because it's not a child component of the camera, I would need some kind of state management to make this easier. In this case, I decided to use Zustand, as it is a really lightweight and easy to use library, which doesn't require me to write a lot of boilerplate code. To quickly break it down, in a new file I can create my state hook with the create function Zustand provides. There I can add all the state variables I need, as well as functions to set the state to new values. Back in my component, I can call the hook I just created and retrieve the state I need. Now, when the user clicks the camera, I can call the tap camera function I just defined, which then also notifies every component where the camera tapped state is used and updates everything accordingly. Okay, now I can easily show and hide the images, but so far this would just throw them right into your face without any kind of transitions, which doesn't look pleasing. This enables me to animate all the images in a sequence, one after the other. It works quite similar to the useTransition hook I used to implement the navigation transitions. I can pass it the count of elements I want to animate and a configuration where I can freely add my needed properties and values. In this case, I just wanted the images to fall down to the camera, so I added a position offset to move the images out of frame and let them fall when the user clicks on the camera. To use this in the UI, I can iterate over the trail via the map function, which accepts a callback that receives the properties for each element which I defined earlier. There, I could calculate the position as before and only add the position offset to the position's Y value. To add some finishing touches, each of the images should receive a title, so that you would know exactly what it is, as this should later be used to navigate to different categories of the photos. This was straightforward, as I could just add a text component which would receive the same calculated position for each image, just with an added offset to the Y-axis. This way, the text would be displayed below the images. Lastly, I added a similar hover effect like the one for the camera to the images so that it would be clearer that you can interact with them. With the basic setup done, I could build the navigation to the gallery and the gallery itself. To navigate to the correct gallery, depending on the image that was tapped, I needed a way to derive some kind of ID or value to later display the correct images for each category. For this, I would use an URL parameter, which for now I just pass the index of the array, and could map my data of the images accordingly. With this out of the way, I noticed a new problem. The transition to the new page looked off, as the images would start animating out, but the animation would be cut off by routing away from the page. I needed to find a way to wait for the animation to finish, and only then start to navigate to the new page. Lucky me, I could take the same approach I used to change the camera model position. In React Spring, you can always pass your configuration on rest function, which gets called when the animation comes to a standstill. In there, I checked if the animation is finished and if the user tapped an image, to only navigate when the user actually tapped an image. If all of the checks would be correct, I could start navigating. With that done, I can implement the gallery view itself. As I already mentioned, I created a 3D gallery in the past videos, but I feel like it doesn't really fit in right now. In the future, my idea is to be able to navigate through the images in the camera display, but currently this is out of scope for the prototype. That's why I decided to keep it simple and build a clean version that would fit better to the current style. For the last part, one of the biggest issues I tackled was to implement responsiveness for the 3D model when it was displayed on different pages. As you know, I implemented a feature that moves the camera around on the page when the user navigates on the website, which worked pretty well as long as I didn't change the size of the window. Basically, the positions I added only really worked for the specific screen size where I currently developed. As soon as I adjusted the window by a few pixels, it was completely misaligned. I already knew that I would have to somehow calculate the model position based on the width and height of the window, but somehow my brain just didn't connect the dots. I spent way too much time researching, reading articles and Stack Overflow posts that told me that React 3 was responsive by default, which confused the hell out of me since for me at the moment it obviously wasn't working like I expected. Okay, what exactly did I do? To begin with, before I even went to fix this problem, I needed to build a proper setup to handle all of this globally. Currently, every time I navigate, I also had to manually call the corresponding set position and set scale functions, which I defined in my state to move my camera model around. To fix this issue, I built my own hook, which handles all of this internally. It listens to route changes via the provided useLocation hook from React and then executes the changes accordingly. So from there I can make all my adjustments depending on the route I'm navigating to at one place in my app. For example, when I'm calling the About page, I reduce the scale of the model and set the position in the top right corner. This also fixed an issue that would be caused by the user reloading the page, where the model would just be displayed in its original state and basically blocking the whole page. This hook detects the route and immediately makes the needed adjustments. Now I just needed to find a way to make this responsive. Right now, the values I provided to change the position were not relative to the screen size. So when I resized the window, the model would just fly somewhere. To tackle this problem, I made use of the use3 hook to derive the viewport and the screen dimensions. First of all, imagine a coordinate system where the 0,0 coordinate is the center. The viewport is provided in Three.js units, which basically tell you how large the coordinate system is. And with this, I can calculate the position of the model. So if I want to align the model in the top right corner, for example, I could just divide viewport width and viewport height by 2. Now I can use this and subtract a small offset to position the model where I need it to be. Even though this works great on desktop side screens, on mobile this is still an issue. I added further checks for the actual screen size and pixels to fix this. Since there's really limited space on mobile screens, I decided that the model should be placed in the center of the navigation bar, which comes down to setting the x-coordinate to 0, so it's horizontally centered, and using viewport.height divided by 2 minus the offset value for the correct height. With all of this, I'm now able to consistently change the position of the model on many different device screens. So to really finish everything off for now, I just need to increase the performance of the site in general. For example, I can still compress the exported model with all its materials down to decrease loading times. And the biggest performance bottleneck right now is that I'm using my original images, which means each and every image is at least like 20 megabytes large. And you can imagine that this takes a while to load if I'm even only displaying like 10 images on one page. Thank you so much for watching, and if you made it this far, consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate it. There is even a Discord server for the community link down below in the description. That's it. See ya!